There are mornings that feel just like any other, but something deep, quiet, and unexplainable begins to shift. You can't see it. You just feel that today is not meant to follow the script. It might be the silence of a radio that usually plays, the strange way the light falls through your window, or simply a weight in your chest that wasn't there before. That's how it started for Elena Torres. She didn't know why she hesitated that morning, why she stood at her kitchen door for a second, longer, why a soft unease brushed against her like invisible fingers telling her to wait. She thought it was nothing, but it wasn't, because what came next was real, a warning, a sign, and had she ignored it, she may not have lived to tell the story. This is not fiction. It's a true encounter with the mysterious, one of those rare angel signs before tragedy that whispers into the lives of ordinary people, right before everything could go wrong. Was it fate, a guardian angel, or something even more divine? Whatever it was, it came just in time. Before the worst happens, sometimes the universe sends a sign. If you believe in guardian angels, fate, or simply want to hear real stories of life-changing moments, subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us for today's powerful story. Ordinary morning, subtle stirring. It wasn't a dream, not in the way dreams usually come, strange, scattered, forgotten by morning. This one stayed. It came just before dawn, when the sky outside Elena's window still carried that fragile blue between night and morning. In the dream, the world had grown quiet, far too quiet. The sea, once roaring and alive, began to pull itself away from the shore as if holding its breath. Wave by wave it retreated, exposing a vast, wet emptiness where the water should have been. The sand glistened like glass. The seafloor shimmered under the pale moonlight, silent and waiting. Then came the light. It rose from the horizon, not blinding, not harsh, but warm, like the glow behind closed eyes when sunlight breaks through curtains. It moved with a rhythm, gentle and sacred, forming what looked like wings, not birds, not clouds, but wings made of light, pulsing softly above the empty shore. And then, a voice, neither male nor female, just calm. It said, "Listen for the call, safety hides in silence." That was all. No thunder, no warning sirens, only that single sentence. And then she woke. Elena sat upright in bed, heart pounding like it had run a mile, her skin lightly damp as if touched by mist. The dream had felt more real than the bed beneath her, more real than the ticking clock on the wall, more real than anything she'd carried from sleep since she was a child. She whispered the words again, not out loud, but in her mind, and something inside her trembled, not in fear, but in recognition, as if a part of her already knew what it meant, but couldn't put it into words. She reached for the notebook she kept on her nightstand, a small leather journal where she sometimes scribbled dreams, feelings, little pieces of thought that didn't fit anywhere else. She wrote it down slowly. Ocean pulling away. Wings of light. Voice, listen for the call. Safety hides in silence. Then the day began. Coffee, the clink of ceramic, the cat stretching beside her feet. The usual hum of routine started to rise, and with it the heavy voice of logic returned, brushing off the dream as something symbolic, poetic, but nothing more. After all, it was just a dream, right? But something had changed. She noticed it as she walked to school. The street, usually filled with small morning noises, bikes, barking dogs, the clatter of trash bins, was oddly still. Not eerily so, just quieter, as if the world was holding something back. She looked up at the sky. It was cloudless. A gentle shade of pale gold touched the rooftops, the same color as the wings in her dream. For a moment, Elena stopped walking, one hand resting on the gate of A neighbor's garden, her eyes fixed on the sky. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she felt watched, not in a fearful way, more like accompanied. Like someone had placed a hand gently on her shoulder, unseen, but steady. The voice from the dream echoed again, low and clear. Safety hides in silence. All that morning, even as children filled her classroom and laughter bounced off the walls, she kept feeling that presence, quiet but insistent, like a thread running just beneath her. Thoughts. And then came the moment that froze everything. Just after lunch, she was meant to walk to the post office 2 blocks away, a quick errand she did twice a week. She picked up her bag, took a step toward the door, and stopped. No sound, no visible sign, just a stillness, suddenly so deep it felt sacred. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Her hand was on the doorknob, but something pressed gently against her chest, a deep, invisible resistance. She couldn't move. Her breath caught. A whisper inside, softer than a whisper really, said, "Not now." She blinked, looked around. The hallway was empty. The clock ticked. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal, so she stayed. 10 minutes later, sirens screamed down the street. A gas explosion 2 buildings away, exactly along the route she would have walked. People were hurt. One storefront was nearly gone. Smoke rose like a dark question into the sky. And Elena. She stood frozen in the school hallway, hand still on the doorknob, eyes wide, heart hollow. She remembered the voice, the dream, the stillness, the warmth of those golden wings. It wasn't a coincidence. She didn't speak of it that day, not to her co-workers, not even to herself. But that night, alone in her kitchen, she opened her journal and traced her fingers over the dream she had written just hours before. Listen for the call. Safety hides in silence. Tears came without warning, not from fear, but from awe. From the realization that something had tried to reach her, and she had listened. Maybe it was a guardian angel, maybe it was fate or something far older. She didn't know, and maybe she never would. But deep in her spirit, Elena understood one thing with clarity. She had been saved, not by chance, not by instinct, but by something unseen that still walks beside her. The next morning, the sky outside was painted in shades of faded rose and blue, the soft colors of a world just waking. Elena moved through her routine in silence, wrapped in a lingering sense of stillness she couldn't quite name. The dream still lived inside her. The words, the wings, they hadn't faded like most dreams do. She stepped into the kitchen. The air was cool, the floor cold beneath her bare feet. Milo, her cat, brushed against her leg, purring softly. The scent of coffee brewing filled the room, warm, grounding. And for a brief moment, everything felt steady again. And then it happened. A sharp burst of static cut through the air. The radio on the counter, the one that had refused to work just the day before, suddenly crackled to life. No one had touched it. The dial hadn't moved. Elena froze, her hand still halfway to the coffee pot. The volume began to rise on its own, not loud, but steadily, as if someone unseen was turning the knob with careful intention. Out of the static, a voice emerged, calm, familiar, the same voice from her dream. "Stay home at noon, shelter the children." The words moved through the room like smoke, slow, weightless, and undeniable. Elena's breath caught. Her fingers trembled, and for a second she thought she might drop her cup. Then, silence. No jazz, no announcement, no signal ID. The voice didn't belong to any station she knew, and she knew them all. It repeated once more, exactly the same. "Stay home at noon, shelter the children." And then the radio went still. Elena stared at it, her chest rising and falling in slow, uneven waves. The dial was exactly where she had left it, tuned to the same soft jazz station she always played during breakfast, but there was no music now, just silence, deep, resonant, and full of meaning. Her hands still shook, but her heart didn't race. In fact, a strange calm spread across her chest, settling over her like a warm shawl. It wasn't fear, it wasn't panic, it was something else, something sacred. She didn't know how to explain it. She didn't even try. All she knew was that she had been spoken to, directly, deliberately, and whoever, or whatever, had reached out from that dream, had found another way to reach her now. Noon was hours away, but time already felt different, slower, heavier. She didn't know what was coming, but she believed it would. The school halls felt narrower that morning, not physically, they hadn't changed, but something in the air had. Every footstep echoed a little longer. Every voice carried a weight it didn't seem to notice. Elena walked through it all like someone moving underwater, aware of everything but disconnected. The voice from the radio still clung to her skin. Stay home at noon, shelter the children. It looped in her thoughts with a quiet urgency, like a bell that no one else could hear. She considered telling someone, just a whisper of it. Maybe to Marta, the kind math teacher with kind eyes, or to the principal who had always treated her fairly. But as she listened to their conversations over lukewarm coffee and morning papers, comments about quizzes, student behavior, someone's upcoming birthday weekend, the thought of interrupting with angel voices and dream warnings felt ridiculous. What would she even say? My radio spoke to me this morning. A voice told me to keep the children inside. They'd smile politely, maybe nod, then go right back to their lesson plans. So she stayed silent. And yet, every giggle that echoed from the playground that morning, every sound of sneakers skipping across tile and pencils tapping on desks, felt drenched in meaning. The children's laughter wasn't just noise today, it rang with something deeper, more fragile. Shelter the children. The words returned again and again. She felt them behind her eyes, in her fingertips, in the stillness between moments. At recess, she stood near the classroom window and watched the sky shift. What had been a bright, gentle morning was darkening fast. Clouds rose suddenly over the sea, thick and grey, like smoke climbing a mountain. The color of the ocean turned slate. The air pressed heavier against the windows. This wasn't in the forecast. Not this soon, not like this. Her pulse began to pick up, subtle at first. The logical part of her mind tried to offer explanations. Coincidence, sudden front, sea weather. But another part of her, deeper and older, felt the shift like a pressure in her bones. The children were still laughing, playing, running under the fading light. They didn't see it coming. And maybe that was the point. Elena stood frozen in place, her hands gripping the windowsill. Doubt clawed at her. What if you're wrong? What if it was just a dream after all? But another voice, smaller, softer, but certain, whispered back, what if you're not? And that was the question she couldn't shake. The clock above the whiteboard ticked closer to noon, each second landing like a small drumbeat in Elena's chest. She had barely touched her lunch. Her fingers trembled faintly as she rearranged the same stack of papers twice. Outside, the sky had shifted into something almost unnatural, swollen with grey, heavy with silence. Inside the classroom, the children chattered and passed notes. Their voices were light, unaware. Elena tried to smile, she tried to breathe, but beneath the surface, a storm was already moving through her spirit. She glanced at the hallway clock, 11:58. She stood slowly, and then it happened. A sharp click echoed through the ceiling. The school's intercom system, normally silent except for morning, Announcements or fire drills sprang to life. A static hum filled every hallway, every classroom. Teachers looked up, confused. Students paused mid-sentence. The air changed, something unseen brushing through the space like a breath held too long. Then the voice returned, the same calm, sacred voice from her dream, from her kitchen. But now it filled the school, every corridor, every room. Now, just that, one word, steady, clear, unmistakable, and somehow it was enough. Elena didn't think, she moved. Her voice rose before her mind had time to process. Basement, now! Everyone, go, go, go! Children looked at her, startled, unsure if this was a drill. Teachers stared. But something in Elena's tone, something deep and unshakable, made them listen. The principal stepped out of his office mid-call, eyes narrowing at the sudden movement. "Elena," he asked, but she met his gaze with the full weight of what she had seen, what she had heard, and what she knew. She didn't explain. She didn't plead. She just nodded once, firm, urgent, absolute. And that was enough. He gave the signal. The drill was declared. Doors opened, chairs scraped, feet hurried. Down the halls they moved, single file, down the stairwells, into the safety of the earth beneath the school. It all happened in less than 3 minutes. And when the last classroom door shut behind them, when the echo of running footsteps finally stilled, Elena stood at the edge of the basement steps, breathless. Not from a fear, but from awe. The sign had come, clearly, audibly, publicly. And she had heard it, she had trusted it, and for the first time, she wasn't alone in knowing something greater was at work. The last child had barely stepped off the stairwell when the world above them changed. A deep, rolling roar, not like thunder but heavier, like the sky itself had cracked, trembled through the bones of the building. The ground shivered beneath their feet. Overhead, the windows rattled violently in their frames, and somewhere far off, the faint cry of sirens rose like a warning too late. The children gasped. Some clung to each other. Others froze, wide-eyed and silent. The adults exchanged glances that said everything without speaking a word. In the dim glow of the basement lights, flickering slightly, as if uncertain whether to hold or give way, Elena crouched beside the youngest ones. Her hands found theirs, small and shaking, and she held them tightly. She closed her eyes, and from somewhere deep in her memory a prayer surfaced, one she hadn't spoken in years, not since childhood, not since loss, not since faith had felt like a fading photograph. But now it returned, word by word, breath by breath, like something old and sacred that had simply waited to be remembered. Her lips moved without sound. Her heart beat to the rhythm of a name she couldn't see. And above it all, in the stillness behind the fear, came the echo. Stay home at noon. Shelter the children. That, a voice, steady, calm, and otherworldly, repeated in her soul like a heartbeat. It was not loud, but it anchored her. The building groaned under the weight of wind or impact. They couldn't be sure. Dust trickled from the ceiling. A teacher to her left quietly counted heads again, whispering names under her breath like prayers of her own. No one spoke of what might be happening above. They simply waited. The air was thick, not just with dust, but with the unbearable tension of not knowing. Each minute stretched until it felt like a lifetime. Every sound from above, the creak of wood, the faint shift of metal, made them flinch. And yet, through it all, Elena remained still. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel strong. She just felt held by something she couldn't explain, by a message that had arrived through a dream, through static, through silence, by a force that had given her no proof, but all the conviction she needed. Half an hour passed, but down in that small, trembling room filled with whispering children and worried eyes, it felt like eternity, and still, That voice, that memory, that sign, it never left her. When the all clear finally came, the children were quiet, too quiet. Their usual restlessness had faded into something deeper, more reverent. As officials opened the basement doors and led them back up, their footsteps echoed with a hesitant rhythm, like each step carried the weight of something they couldn't yet name. Elena held back near the stairwell, letting the students go ahead. A part of her didn't want to see what waited above, but something stronger, the same quiet knowing that had guided her all along, pulled her forward. And then she saw it. The hallway lights flickered back to life. The scent of damp dust still lingered in the air, but it was the view from the windows that stole the breath from her chest. The courtyard, the same place where the children would have lined up after lunch, laughing, distracted, unaware, was now a twisted map of chaos. Large wooden beams, once part of the rooftop playground, had been torn free and hurled across the yard like paper. A slide lay upside down, splintered at the base. Heavy metal poles were embedded in the pavement, driven deep by a force that seemed impossible. It hadn't been in the forecast. No warning had come through the news. And yet a sudden microburst, as the weather officials called it later, had slammed into the coastline with such precision and fury that it tore through town like a hand sweeping pieces from a board. Across the city, fallen power lines sparked small fires, rooftops were stripped, debris blocked roads. But the building stood intact, no shattered windows, no structural damage, just the courtyard, empty, scarred and silent. Reporters arrived within the hour, calling it a rare atmospheric anomaly. One described it as a freak weather event, intense but brief. The term miracle was never used, not publicly, but Elena knew. She stood at the threshold of the main door, the wind tugging gently at her coat, and stared at the scattered wreckage that might have been lined with children's backpacks, might have echoed with screams, might have rewritten 100 lives in a single breath, but it hadn't. Not because the storm hadn't come, but because someone had spoken first. A dream, a voice through static, a whisper through silence, a single word on the intercom. She looked at the sky, now calm, as if it had never held danger at all. The clouds drifted slowly, oblivious, but Elena saw what others didn't. Not just destruction, not just survival. She saw a tragedy rewritten. And in the quiet of her soul, she whispered 2 words that rose like incense. Thank you. That evening, the house held a stillness that felt almost sacred. The kind of quiet that doesn't just fill a room, but rests in it, like something unseen had settled gently over the walls, the floor, the very air. Elena stepped into her kitchen, the same place where it had all begun. The lights above cast a soft golden hue across the counters, and outside the window the sky glowed with the last light of day. A slow burning orange, fading into pale lavender. The radio sat untouched, exactly where it had been, silent, waiting. She stood before it for a long moment, hands folded over her chest, not out of ritual, but reverence. Then she whispered into the stillness, "Thank you." No expectation, no request. Just those 2 words, full of everything she didn't know how to say. And then the radio answered, not with static, not with a voice, but with a single warm chord. It rose like a sigh through the speaker, soft and low, glowing with a kind of sound that felt more like light than music. It was gentle, like sunlight touching water, a tone that held no melody, no message, only peace. Elena stood frozen, tears already rising. The sound lasted only a few seconds, and then it was gone. Not abruptly, but gracefully, fading back into silence like the sun slipping beneath the sea. She didn't need more, no explanation, no proof. Her tears fell quietly, not from fear, not even from relief, but from something deeper, a sacred awe, the quiet knowing that she had been heard, that something beyond her understanding had reached across the veil, not with thunder, but with presence. The unseen had spoken, not in words, but in the only language her heart was ready to hear. And in that moment, Elena understood. She had not been alone, not in her fear, not in her faith, not in her listening. Something had watched, something had warned, something had answered, and it had done so with silence, a whisper, and a single chord of light. Sunday morning arrived with the hush of reverence. The sky was overcast, soft grey clouds hanging low, like the heavens were listening. Elena stood at the front of her small community chapel, hands trembling slightly as she held the microphone. The wooden pews were filled with familiar faces, neighbors, friends, children she had taught, elders who had watched her grow. And yet, as she stood beneath the modest cross and warm amber light, she felt like she was standing before something far greater. She hadn't planned to speak, not until the moment came, and something inside her gently said, "Now." Her voice was unsteady at first, fragile, but her words held weight. She spoke of the dream, of the wings of light, and the voice that had first whispered through the waves. She spoke of the morning the radio had come to life, the words spoken not by man, but by something she could only call divine. She told them about the hallway intercom, about the single command that changed everything. Now, her voice cracked when she described the basement, the small hands she had held, the prayer that found its way back into her mouth after so many years of silence. She didn't embellish. She didn't try to convince. She just told the truth, the way it had happened. Some in the crowd leaned forward wide-eyed, tears silently falling. Others stared quietly, lips pressed into thoughtful lines. A few furrowed their brows, caught somewhere between wonder and doubt. And yet, no one moved, no one interrupted, because the weight of her testimony settled gently over the room, like fog over a still lake, soft but undeniable. She ended with nothing more than a breath, a pause, and then a whisper. "When love warns, it sounds like peace." The chapel fell into silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that means something sacred has just passed through the room. Then, slowly, came the response. A few gentle hands clapped, then more. Someone softly said, "Amen." Another nodded through tears. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, honest, real. And in that quiet, Elena felt something open, not just in the room, but in the hearts around her. Not everyone would believe, not everyone would understand, but everyone felt. And maybe, she thought, that was enough. Weeks passed. The world, as it always does, resumed its rhythm. The children laughed again in the hallways. Teachers spoke of lesson plans, field trips, and spring breaks. The sky turned blue, then grey, then blue again. And still, Elena rose each morning, quietly, gently, with a reverence that hadn't been there before. She still brewed her coffee, still fed Milo, who brushed against her ankles like clockwork. She still turned the radio dial to her favorite jazz station, but now it wasn't just for music, it was for remembrance. Some mornings the radio played as expected, soft piano, warm brass, a comforting melody for a sleepy dawn. But other times, just briefly, it would hum a single note, one long, gentle tone that lingered in the room like breath on glass. No words, no static, just presence. Elena didn't flinch anymore when it happened. She didn't try to explain it. There were no more notebooks filled with questions, no more wondering if she imagined it. She knew. The miracle didn't need to prove itself again. It now lived in the folds of her daily life, in the silence between seconds, in the stillness before the wind, in the soft awareness that she was never entirely alone. Because once you've heard something that wasn't meant for the ears, once you followed a voice that only the soul could understand, something inside you stays open forever. And whenever clouds gathered again, as they always will, Elena no longer panicked. She simply listened. Not with fear, not with doubt, but with the quiet courage of someone who had once been warned and once been spared. She listened not with her ears, but with her heart. And sometimes, in that deep listening, she felt it again. A subtle warmth brushing her shoulder, a pause before a decision, a note played on a silent radio, a whisper of grace. We don't always get the signs we want. Sometimes they come as dreams we forget too soon. Sometimes they come as a sudden stillness, or a voice we've never heard speaking just one word, now. And sometimes they come too softly for the world to notice, but not too softly for us. Because maybe it was a coincidence, maybe it was chance, maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was everything. We're not here to give answers. That's not the purpose of this space. We're here to hold the silence between coincidence and faith, right where most miracles happen. So now, we leave the rest with you. Have you ever experienced a sign like this? Do you believe it was just coincidence or something divine? What would you have done if this happened to you? Do you think angels are trying to guide us, even when we don't notice? If these questions stir something in your heart, even something you can't explain, you're not alone. If this story touched your heart, don't let these signs go unnoticed. Subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us to hear more real stories of faith, mystery, and the moments when life whispers, just in time. Thank you for staying until the end. But remember, there are stories that aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be felt. We'll see you in the next one, if you're still listening.